Hello, I'm Penny Thornton and I'm talking astrology. And on this video, I'm going to be talking about Neptune in Aries. Now, this planet enters the sign of Aries on the 30th of March, and it's going to stay there. Well, it'll come out for a little breathing space later in the year, but it'll go back full time in January of 2026. And it's going to remain there till 2038. So it's a long period, and the reason why is because it takes 165 years for Neptune to go around the sun, and therefore 165 years to go around your chart, which is why no one ever gets a Neptune return. Now, in fact, we may not get a Neptune return, but we certainly get a Neptune opposition, and those of you born between 1941 and 1943 are going to have your Neptune opposition at this time and through into 2026. And those of you born in 1982 through to 1984 are at your Neptune square. Neptune will be squaring your natal Neptune in Scorpio. And those of you born in 1998 through to 2011, then you're also going to be having your Neptune square, Neptune in Aquarius on this occasion. And those who were born 1998, 99, 2000 will be having it first. So you'll be having it this year and into next year. And I'm not going to get into what a Neptune opposition or a Neptune square means, because at this point, I want to tell you more about Neptune in Aries and for you to get familiar with the idea of what Neptune is. But suffice to say, what happens when you come to these great life cycles, Neptune opposition Neptune, Neptune square Neptune, is that you get the meaning of Neptune in your natal chart. It becomes evident to you. All sorts of things that are happening are related to what Neptune means in your natal chart. And a little bit later on through this video, I'm going to be looking at Neptune through the houses. This is not a long, intense look at Neptune in the houses. It's going to be just a kind of brief flavor of it. But that too will give you some idea of what Neptune in Aries means. Now, another way we astrologers understand and then put forward our expectations of what an outer planet or a slower moving planet is going to, or how it's going to behave in the various signs, is that we look back through history and we see what was the flavor of that period. And we've got some pretty important things to go on. And to my mind, if I wanted to make a little something in a nutshell that kind of described Neptune in Aries, I would say it's a crusade. Think about the Holy Crusades back in I'm trying to think of when that was, 1206 to 1219, when all these holy knights, if you like, were going to fight battles in far-flung places. So it was a mixture of divinity, the holy, and also fighting aggression. And if we look back a little bit further than that, we go to 60 to 73 AD or CE, as it's now we call it CE, not AD. And that was a time the Romans were busy conquering swathes of Europe, including Britain. And at that period of time, the Iceni Wars, if you like, with the Iceni tribe, Boudica, Boadicea, who was ultimately victorious over the Romans. So you get this idea that it has to do with a fight, has to do with battling for what you believe in. And that might be the biggest thrust, really, that we get from Neptune in Aries. But I also, looking back at history, we come back to Henry VIII's time, and he split from the Catholic Church, created his own, the church. And if you remember, at that time, we had the dissolution of the monasteries, dissolution, a really, really good word to put with Neptune, the idea that the monasteries were sacked. There were no more monasteries getting all the money and serving the public spirit in that way. There was a whole new Church of England brought about by Henry VIII. So you're getting to see that there is a bit of a theme. More relevant even than that, I think, is the last time Neptune was in Aries, and that was during the American Civil War, 1861 to 1874. And I'm going to spend a little bit of time on the American Civil War. I'm not going to give you a history lesson, but the fact is it's very relevant to the times we're living in, and the astrology is fascinating when we come to look at that. So let's have a think for a minute about Neptune as one of the outer planets. Now, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto were all discovered after 1781. And up until that point, Saturn was the farthermost planet out. That was the end of the solar system. That's all there was. There was nothing beyond that. But then Uranus came along, and then a little bit later came Neptune, and then finally came Pluto. So our worldview has expanded considerably since 1871. But yet these outer planets, they're not personal. And in astrology, we talk about the personal planets, and we mean the Sun, the Moon, Mercury, Venus, and Mars. When it comes to Jupiter and Saturn, we sort of say these are the non-personal, because they do reflect much bigger themes and things that are about access to our personal being. But when we go beyond Saturn, we get out into the realms of experience that isn't familiar to us. We don't kind of own the experience that Neptune, Uranus, and Pluto bring to us. We access those principles by the connections our personal planets make to the outer planets. That's how we understand it. I've been talking about Neptune quite a lot recently. In fact, at Amadown, I gave a whole talk about Neptune, and I called it the bridge to the divine. And I think what's very interesting about this is that when we think about what Neptune represents, it is divinity. It is that extraordinary sense of being in a realm which is of spirit, of higher consciousness, the very highest level we can get in terms of our spirit and our consciousness. It's very difficult to access that. We can access it briefly, but we can't live there permanently. And I called it the bridge to the divine, the idea that we can access it, but periodically. And I have this image in my mind of the bridge to the divine, if you'll go along with me. And I see this kind of rope bridge over a ravine. And as you start at the beginning of that, way in the distance is the fog and mist. You can't even see where it ends. But all you know is you're on this rickety bridge. You may make it all the way through to Neptune. On the other hand, it's precarious. And I think that tells us a lot about the nature of Neptune, because we get divine experience, as I've just said, but it's also about visions and artistry, healing, sensitivity, compassion, all those things that empathy, this is all Neptune's properties. But at the opposite side of that, and as you know, astrology is all about polarities, we get treachery, betrayal, illusion, delusion. From enlightenment, we go to the opposite and we get madness, genius and madness. We get saints and sinners. These are complete opposites, which all belong to the realm of Neptune. And certainly we are very familiar with Neptune recently because of all the fake news and the conspiracy theories that are doing the rounds. I mean, that's pure Neptune, if you like. And of course, they become weapons in wars in terms of information, false information. But I also look at this and think about Neptune in Aries because of the idea of the Crusades, about the Holy Grail, all of those things that kind of sum up what Neptune in Aries is all about. We think too we may get some extraordinary weapons that are a little bit insidious. They're not like missiles that, cause fire. They're sort of under the radar kind of thing. They're biological weapons. They're weapons that work on our infrastructure, our digital intelligence, things like that. So that's really war, but Neptune in Aries kind of war. Now, another way of imagining or identifying with Neptune in Aries is the kind of figures that are the archetypes of Neptune in Aries. And I think Joan of Arc is a perfect example of Neptune in Aries, and if you were to put a figure with it. And when we think about Joan of Arc, she had visions, God spoke to her, and based on those visions and the conviction and her belief and faith in God, she was able to help bring France to victory over England. Of course, she was burnt at the stake for her efforts. And again, that's a real Neptunian tale. Another kind of image that would sort of sum up the idea of Neptune in Aries would be King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table, the quest for the Holy Grail, Parsifal, all those great giant themes, which are about a much bigger picture, the search for God, the fight, the faith in God, driving you to kill dragons. It's that kind of energy. And maybe we can bring that into our own sphere of experience and say that all of us at some point in this 13-year cycle that Neptune will be in our Aries, we are going to slay our own dragons. And of course, that's, as I said a little bit ago, for 13 years, it's not going to be one long note that you will say, oh, Neptune in Aries, all the time. It will only be when Neptune in its transit connects with something in your chart that brings out that Neptune in Aries experience to you. And of course, the most important ones are really Neptune on the 4 angles. So Neptune on the ascendant, we're talking about a transit of Neptune on the ascendant, transiting Neptune on the descendant, transiting Neptune on the midheaven, transiting Neptune on the IC. The 4 angles of the chart, always the most important part of any chart. When Neptune comes to those points, then you are going to be subsumed really with Neptune, and your experience will go from the very best in terms of enlightenment and dreams coming true and extraordinary things happening to you, which are a celebration in your life, to the absolute opposite, which means the loss of something dear to you, the erosion of something that was once part of your life. And by talking about this, it reminds me a little bit about when I was young, before I took up astrology, and I had Ingrid Lind, who was the founder, one of the founders, and actually also the president of the Faculty of Astrological Studies. She was my mentor. And I remember when she'd done my chart, which she did by writing it, that's how they were done in those days, she put in that, I remember what she said, at a certain point, and I can't remember what year it was or necessarily what exactly it was to do with Neptune that was coming into my experience, but she talked about giving up something dearly prized. And I remember thinking, oh, what does she mean? But it was only when I left the Royal Ballet Company that I realized that's what I'd done. I had sacrificed my whole ballet career. And Neptune demands a sacrifice. It isn't always as dramatic as that, but it's a good example. And I think it's also a good example of astrology speak, how we astrologers must convey information to someone without, seeing it as a scenario, so much as telling you what an experience it will be, what is actually the process that you'll be going through. So yes, Neptune on the angles. Also, because of Neptune's 165-year orbit around the sun, We never, of course, get a Neptune return, but we do get a Neptune opposition. And as that's 1941 to 1943. If you were born then, you're going to have your Neptune opposition. And the Neptune squares are going to be those of you born from about 1982. Well, more in the near future, we're talking about 1982, 1984. And those of you born 1998 through to about 2001, they're the initial group who are going to experience Neptune in the sense of, what it means in your natal chart, and bringing you the experience of Neptune in all its many guises. For some of you, a dream come true. For others of you, something to do with sacrifice and loss. And remember, it's 13 years in this sign. And so there's going to be other things throughout this period until 2038 that are going to amount to experiencing Neptune in all its many phases. Now, another thing to bear in mind with Neptune in Aries is that it brings together, if we look at keywords and we think about Neptune and we think about, yes, it's divine, it's empathetic, it's uplifting, it is the highest manifestation of love, all those beautiful things that Neptune represents for us. But at the opposite end of that, we get treachery and betrayal and illusion, delusion, all of that. So that's going to be playing long and loud too. And as we go through these 13 years of this, we think where we are in terms of humanity. And I think in general, when we look at all the outer planets, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, they carve their signatures on a generation. They carve their signatures on humanity's evolution, which is why, we're meeting Neptune in Aries in 2025 in a very different space than we met it in 1861. We have evolved. History is behind us. So we meet this Neptune blessings and challenges in a very different way. And if we think about Pluto in Aquarius, that's also just beginning its journey. And it's very easy to see. You don't need to be an astrologer to bring you this message, because we know that a new order, a new world order is coming about. And that comprises Neptune in Aries, Pluto in Aquarius. Uranus, of course, only spends 7 years in a sign, so it's a little bit of a faster movement. But if we go back to the most recent transit of Neptune in Aries, and we go back to the American Civil War, 1861 through to 1874, what was interesting then was that it was the time of when Saturn was opposing Neptune. That happened in 1862. And now we have Saturn conjunct Neptune. And also Uranus was in Gemini in, I think, 1863 during that passage. And of course, Uranus is going to be in Gemini beginning this year in July, and it's going to reach the USA's Uranus be a Uranus return in 2027, 2028. So we are really getting echoes from that period of history, especially in America, because as we know, you don't need me to tell you that America is divided, that we are certainly seeing a huge split. And in 1861 through to 1874, that split was North and South, so to do with slavery. But of course, this time it isn't that specific. It isn't North and South. It's more ideological. It's about democracy. It's about nationalism and all those things being different perspectives on where America is heading. And as we can see, as we go forward, those divisions are going to become sharper. And so we will be looking at some certainly big ideological battle in America. But of course, Neptune in Aries, remember this is a sign of war as well. It may also come to its literal expression in some regard. Now, I just want to show you a couple of charts because these are relevant to our story of Neptune in Aries. And I want to show you, first of all, Neptune's entry into Aries. And I'm doing it from the perspective of the United States. And I don't want you to get caught up on, oh, Pluto's on the midheaven and, Uranus is rising. Let's not worry about those kind of things. All I want you to look at and familiarize yourself with is really the grouping of all those planets. And if we look to Neptune, which is in the 11 o'clock position on that circle, you'll see it's very closely conjunct to Mercury, to Venus, to the North Node, and although I haven't drawn it in the fixed star sheet, and I have been talking about this a huge amount this year. We've had lots of examples of this configuration, which has played into so many of the key events that have happened during the course of 2025. Well, whether it was the LA fires, whether it is to do with, cyclones across the world, whether we're looking at events in Russia and Ukraine, all of it, this tight little cluster as Neptune heads into Aries is really, really significant. And we're getting a very intense experience. Lots of things are very, very intense. And while we're just on this picture, if you look at the 7 o'clock position, you'll see the planet Mars at 23 degrees of Cancer. It is too wide to be opposed to Pluto. We're talking about 9-10 degrees, but it is moving forward. And by the time we get to April the 27th, it's going to be exactly opposition Pluto, and that is going to be a very significant date in the global calendar. A lot of things are going to come together around that time that are going to be of this shape-shifting nature. And I've talked about New World Orders, all of that. That's very much Neptune in Aries. Now, keep that in your mind. Keep that position of Neptune in Aries and the planets in Pisces. And let's move to this chart. And this is the chart of the American Civil War. And I made it a little bit easier for you to see by putting in the current planets on the outside of the ring. So as you can see, we have a time that the American Civil War began. It began on the 12th of April, 1861, at 4:30 in the morning, when shots were fired over the fort. I forget what the fort was, but it's certainly in Charleston Harbor. So we have an exact time. And what you'll notice there, so interesting, look at that, Neptune, 29 degrees of Pisces from 57 minutes. It was about to head into Aries. And if we look, we've got Mercury conjuncting Neptune at that time. And of course, we have a whole cluster of planets today and the outer ring that are around that degree area. And I don't want to take you into other realms, except I suppose I should point out, if we look at the 7 o'clock position, you will see Mars conjunct Uranus at between 6 and 9 degrees of Gemini. Now, the United States Uranus is 8 degrees 55 minutes, 9 degrees of Gemini. So the USA was having a Uranus return at the start of the American Civil War. And America will similarly be having another Uranus return in a couple of years' time, at the same time as Neptune is making its journey through Aries. Now, there's a little bit more to this than meets the eye as well. And I'm going to now bring up the chart of the USA so that you can see in that 3 o'clock position, Uranus is 8 degrees of Gemini. It's natal Uranus. What I want to draw your attention to right now is the MCIC axis. We've got the midheaven at 1 degree of Libra and 3 minutes. the IC, the Imum Coli, at 1 degree of Aries and 3 minutes. Back in 1861, Saturn was on the midheaven, and this was at the time of the Civil War. 1862, Neptune in Aries, 1 degree of Aries. And in 1862, we had a Saturn-Neptune opposition on the United States MC-IC axis at the same time as a Uranus return. And as we move into 2026, there will be a Saturn-Uranus conjunction on the IC, 0 degrees Aries, and a few minutes, I think, is the degree of the Saturn-Neptune conjunction, but it's as near as damn it to the IC. So we are really, really having a kind of echo of those times. And it is significant. And I think, if ever, we can come back to me again, but if ever there was a way of really showing how astrology and its patterns and the cycles of the planets do have great meaning for us, it's evidence like this. We already know what's going on because we're living through these times. And if you look back to 1861, 1862, and on through to 1874, and those times when America was reinventing itself, and it was a bloody experience, you can see the parallel. It's there for you to see quite clearly. Now, before I start to look at Neptune in the houses, it occurred to me while I was talking to you about this kind of spirit of, when we think about Neptune and its reference to healing, social services, health, just very recently in England, we've had the abolition of the National Health Service England. So there's a radical reform going to take place in the health service. And I think that's going to also be present all over the world, whether you live in Australia, whether you live in America, wherever you may live. There's this idea of reforming health services and the struggle and fight to get health front forward, and the mission, really, if you like, to get health for the nation in some form, which also includes sacrificing the abolition of old systems in order to get new systems in order. That's another really, really classic example of Neptune in Aries. Now, a little bit earlier on, I talked about the idea that the outer planets and their passage through a particular sign does bring about or does reflect aspects of the sign. That's giving it a flavor. But the really, really important factor with any of these outer planets is or are the contacts, the aspects it makes with other planets, and especially the slower moving planets. And what we're going to see as we go through some of this year and certainly into next year, 2026, is a very big and important planetary relationship between Saturn and Neptune. I mean, I just talked about that. I made a brief mention looking back at the American Civil War, and again, having an echo of that as we go through this year and into next year. We've also got this year, we've got a Jupiter-Neptune square. The Jupiter-Neptune cycle began in 2022. So we've got some important relations or relationships with Neptune and both Jupiter and Saturn, which are also going to be significant for global affairs and national and international affairs. I'm actually going to do separate videos on the Saturn-Neptune conjunction and the Jupiter-Neptune square. So I don't want to get into it too deeply on this one, but suffice to say, it's the aspects, it's the connection Neptune is making to other planets that really brings out the story that's going to be through Neptune in Aries. And the same really with your natal chart. When you think swathes of people are going to be born with Pluto in Aquarius, it's a generational thing. They're going to share that experience with millions upon millions of people born while Pluto is in Aquarius. It's not personal. But where Pluto is in your chart, when you were born, what position was Pluto in? What relationship was it having to your personal planets? Was it near an angle? Which house was it? That's important. And it's the same with Neptune and the same with Uranus. Because as these outer planets are such slow movers, you're going to have that same planet in that same sign as everybody in your generation. So it's not unique. However, looking at Neptune in the houses is really one very important way of really getting to know where the impact of Neptune is going to be in your life during the course of the time it is in Aries. So wherever Aries is in your natal chart, that's going to be where Neptune is wending its way. And as it forms aspects to your natal planets, that's when you get the experience of Neptune in Aries for you. It just on its own, with nothing happening, no connection to anything in your natal chart, you're not really going to notice it, except looking out on the world and seeing the big themes that I've talked about: crusades, holy wars, idealistic wars, the importance of idealism driving change and forging growth. That's the big arching theme of Neptune in Aries. How it relates to you and brings it into your personal sphere is when Neptune makes a connection to something in your natal chart. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, Neptune on the angles is the most important thing. You've got Neptune on your ascendant. Wow, that direct experience of Neptune is going to make a difference to how you come across to other people. So we're looking at two things here, aren't we? We're looking at, are people misunderstanding you? Are you fabricating something and people aren't getting you? There's a strangeness and something going on that is making you indistinct to other people. And at the same time, people may start to mistrust you, to start to believe you're not real, you're a bit of a fake person. And to a certain extent, that's also going to be part of what happens when Neptune moves through your first house. It's about you personally. So your appearance may change. How it changes is going to vary from person to person. Maybe you're going to lose an enormous amount of weight, or maybe you're going to gain a huge amount of weight. That changes your appearance. But it's also about style, isn't it? That with Neptune there, you may want to convey a different aspect of your being. And all such Neptune principles are going to come streaming and flooding into your life. If you've got Neptune on your ascendant. If you put it to the opposite point, and to a certain extent it can happen with Neptune on the ascendant and in the first house, because the first house and the seventh house are an axis, and this is known as the relationship axis. So although technically you would look at Neptune on the descendant and say, oh, Neptune is now influencing my relationship life, it can happen that way with Neptune on the ascendant as well. Relationships can still come into that Neptune experience. So what do we get with Neptune? You get the potential for falling deeply, madly, truly in love, meeting your soulmate, finding your other. That's all Neptune. But so too are mysterious things happening in your relationship life, getting ghosted, people just disappearing from your life, losing people, whether, just in the process of a relationship, you lose sight of each other and then the relationship breaks up and you don't see that person anymore, or whether there's something much more dramatic so that you lose that person, maybe because they die. So Neptune is about loss. It's also about betrayal, treachery, but it's also about divine love. So all of that experience, Neptune on the descendant, but also let's look at Neptune on the ascendant as well, bringing in that potential too. So when we look at Neptune on the midheaven, that feeling or that potential for dreams coming true in terms of who you want to be, what your ambitions and life aspirations are all about. You could have Neptune fulfilling your dreams. This has brought you to where you always wanted to be. How magical is that? Celebrity, fame, extraordinary developments in your career. That can be Neptune on your midheaven. But guess what? You can also be betrayed. You can lose an important job. You can be accused of things that have nothing to do with you. In truth, somebody started a rumor. Something happened. You got implicated. Nothing to do with you. That's Neptune. Something you can't put your finger on, or something that's happened that's really changed where you thought you were going in life, where you thought you were in life. And the same thing at the opposite point. When we look at Neptune on the icy are the roots of life. They're the roots of you going back through history to your ancestors. Also represents your home, where you live, and your family, your immediate family, if you've got children, but also your parents, your grandparents. So we go back, and the extended family, that's all to do with that IC. So sometimes we could say very literally, oh, you're going to make a dream move. You're going to move to where you really thought in your dreams, this is where I want to be, where I want to live, where I want to put down roots. Neptune on your IC. You've got a dream home. But it can also mean that your home is no longer something that you own or that you feel safe in. You may lose your home. There may be mortgage problems. And of course, then we come to family. Are there family estrangements, things going on with your family that are inexplicable, but they are, causing estrangement? Neptune on the IC. If we come back and look generally at the first house, as I talked about, it's like how I address Neptune on the ascendant, but as it moves through the first house, it's less dramatic than that. And you will experience it during periods of time when Neptune makes a connection to something in your natal chart. You'll undergo some kind of metamorphosis, like, you know what, I'm going to dye my hair purple. I'm going to look different. I want a different image. I'm going to, something about my life I need to change very, very personally. That's Neptune. And of course, sometimes you can become very psychic, very open to impressions and different realities. You can have a very kind of heightened spirituality. But remember that rickety rope bridge over the ravine. If you're not careful, that will turn into instability, both in terms of your life, but also mental instability. Addiction is very much a Neptunian thing. Escapism is Neptunian. So the desire to escape the circumstances of your life might be a very good drive, and that you go and live in a mountain village and live off the land and cut out the rat race. That might be something motivated by Neptune moving through your first house. But, it could also be that you go chasing rainbows and you're losing sight of a reality, and, all sorts of things are kind of undermining you. Got to watch out for it. Doesn't mean it will happen. Got to watch out for it. Now, if we look at Neptune moving through the second house, we're looking at self-worth, both in the sense of how we think about ourselves and how other people treat us, the value they place upon us, but also what we have as assets, material assets, what we own. And so when Neptune comes through the second house, your values change. It may be that you suddenly feel, what? Why am I accumulating all this stuff? What does it mean? It doesn't really bring a sense of value to me in a way that matters. You know, they're just objects. It's just money in the bank. You know, I want to do more than this. And so at one end of Neptune in the second house would be this desire to do good works, to support charities, to, you know, have humanitarian purposes and jobs and activities associated with that. And your money would be associated with that. But it can also be lost. Neptune, you can lose your money, maybe to scammers or because you make a poor investment. And we have to know that with what goes on in the global money markets, that really affects pension schemes. So this is something Neptune in the second house may make you think about, and may make you think at this stage, do I need to do something a little bit smarter than putting my money into stocks and shares, which are very vulnerable? Maybe I need to do something more solid so that I don't have myself wiped out by the vicissitudes of the global economy. And it's also really about losing sight of yourself. And, you know, with Neptune, we can have this sense of imposter syndrome. You know, I don't think that I'm worth anything, and I don't know why I'm doing this and why I'm just not worthy enough. And that really needs to be fought, doesn't it? Because everybody has a value, and it's finding your value and supporting who you know you are in your inner, deeper self, that you have value. And it's that you have to keep supporting within yourself, because when Neptune is moving through the second house, there are all sorts of experiences and things that will happen which will threaten your sense of self and make you not sure what's real about you and what's false. So that's something to be aware of. Neptune in the third house is about your outlook. So Neptune is going to change your outlook. So are you going to become more spiritually minded? Are you going to start to see your world in a perspective that you haven't done before? And so that, again, we go back to this idea of Neptune and its idealism. So your ideals are reflected in your outlook. So you are more idealistic. It may also make you want to search for truth. It may make you more interested in healing and helping, and maybe becoming more active in those realms. Neptune, remember, is related to sacrifice and suffering. It doesn't necessarily mean your sacrifice and your suffering, but your outlook and your mind and everything about third house matters is devoted to Neptunian things, which are all the things I've sort of mentioned. Now, let's also think about Neptune giving you a kind of heightened view of things. So you're operating from a high place, higher consciousness, if you like. But that thin line between being that elevated and actually just, you know, escaping from reality, you know, instead of, you know, you're not looking at the reality of it. You've escaped to an area and an outlook, and it isn't real, and it's damaging. It will undermine your ability to handle the real world. In other words, you'll forget to pay your bills. You'll forget that how things work. And I suppose at some level, inspirational as a Neptune transit of your third house may be, it has a potential danger to remove you from reality. So keep connecting with reality all the time. Keep asking yourself, is that a genuine motivation? Is that a genuine way of looking at something? Or have I lost touch with reality? They're just questions to ask yourself. That'll keep you in check, while also being able to embrace those Neptunian things of a higher nature. If we come to the fourth house, Neptune moving through your fourth house, I've already referred to this really with Neptune on the IC. But remember, the IC point is the point at which everything that I've said is at its strongest. As it moves through your fourth house, unless and until it makes a connection with another planet or point in your chart, you're just not going to really recognize it. But I think as a theme, really, the fourth house, bricks and mortar, where we live, what is the roof over our head, but also our family, where we've come from. Those things are undermined by Neptune in the sense that we may lose our sense of identity in terms of our family and our roots. We may even become exiles from the country we were born in. Neptune causing an erosion of your roots in that sense, that you're no longer in the country of your birth, but you are now exiled to another country. But you can also experience exile in your own family, so that somehow you're not part of your family anymore. You've been exiled by your own actions, and decision making as you, or by things that happened mysteriously and actually aren't real at all. Neptune undermines. And then I talked about imposter syndrome when I was looking at the second house. But you can suffer from imposter syndrome when Neptune is moving through your fourth house as well, because it's almost like, was I really born to do this? What's my origins? And hey, I'm not sure that what I'm doing and who I'm being is really underpinned by who I am. So our inner sanctum is the fourth house as well, and it is much to do with our psychological sense of home as it is to do with our four square walls. And yes, on an absolute mundane level, you may go and live by the sea, live on a houseboat, live by water. So there's so many ways in which Neptune can manifest. And remember, it's got 13 years to show you what it can do or how it's going to manifest in your life. If we come to the fifth house, this is the very creative area of the horoscope. So if you are already a creative, you work in a creative field, you're an artist, you're an inventor, you have to come up with ideas, you're in PR, whatever you may be, then Neptune, in a way, kind of inspires you to greater things so that you become more able to pluck ideas out of thin air and allow that to channel and be fed into your creative output. But it also can be kind of false, in that you may suddenly decide that you want to do something that is of a creative nature, but you've got absolutely no training to do that. You might decide, what? I'm going to set myself up as a tarot card reader. But have you got the skills? Have you done the training? Because remember, Neptune is always trying to link you with something that's unseen, that's something that's rarefied. And we can go up blind alleys with Neptune. And when we look at it in the sense of creativity, this is a manifestation. We could decide that our creativity rests in the psychic and spiritual world. Well, maybe it does. Maybe it doesn't. It all depends. But creativity is also procreation. So we often look at one's offspring here. So bringing a baby into the world who's a very special person is very Neptunian. Neptune in the fifth, you've got a special little person. It can be special for all sorts of reasons. There could be special gifts and talents and all those things, but sometimes maybe it's special needs. So the child, in a way, is the vehicle for Neptune. It's for you to experience what Neptune can bring out of you in the way of rising above situations, of being compassionate, of being spiritual, of being a helper and healer yourself. But it's a direct relationship to your child. And there may be other reasons. Well, Neptune is moving through the fifth house, that your children become the messengers of Neptune. What happens to them is Neptunian in nature, and they're delivering that to you through what happens to them in their lives. moving to the sixth house. And Neptune here is all about work and well-being and your lifestyle and the systems that allow your life to function. So you can imagine Neptune makes a real mess here, right? So if you've been a person who's always had a very good routine, who's always had a lot of structure in your life, whether going to work every day has been part of that structure, Neptune comes a-calling in the sixth house, and suddenly you don't have that anymore. You're working from home. You're not working in an office anymore. This may have happened to lots of you during COVID and lockdown, that your life systems were thrown out. You didn't have the order that you had. We don't have COVID anymore, but there could be other reasons why your life and the way it usually runs is not the way it can run anymore, courtesy of Neptune. Now, you will tend to be a little bit more vulnerable to sort of things that are difficult to pin down. In other words, you can have some virus or some condition, and nobody's really too sure what it is, where it comes from, or even how to treat it. And that can be a manifestation of Neptune. But I don't want to scare you stiff. If you're looking at a chart and you're seeing Neptune going through your sixth house and you're thinking, oh my goodness, I'm going to get ill. No, these are just many of the possibilities that can happen when Neptune is in your sixth house. It is the area of work. So again, we might get, and especially if you had a Chiron return during this point, and a lot of people at their Chiron return, 49, 50 years of age, decide to give up their work in corporate institutions or teaching, whatever they might have been doing, and say, you know what? I want to go into healing. I want to do something. I want to mentor people. So with Neptune in the sixth house, we really want a purpose to our lives. We want things to have meaning and to be doing something that's of service. Remember, this whole area is about service. And, you know, one of the things that comes up time and time again when famous people talk about their lives, they talk about, you know, the enrichment of being in service, of doing things in the service of your fellow man. And that really is going to be emphasized with Neptune in the sixth house. But yes, there may be periods of time when your system gets knocked out. That means your day-to-day routine, every bit as much as your health system gets sort of knocked out of its normal running. But ultimately, it's going to enrich you, because Neptune, ultimately, when you go through all that sacrifice and suffering, it makes you, doesn't break you, it makes you. Neptune in the seventh house, well, I've already gone into that really, with the idea of Neptune on the descendant. As it moves through the seventh house, its influence is not quite as sharp, if you can call anything about Neptune sharp, but you know, it's not something that happens. It's sort of under the surface of things. So there can be a sense that you're not very happy in a relationship, or that you really, really love somebody very, very much, but you can't reach them. And there's a lot of unrequited love that goes on when you've got a Neptune moving through the seventh house. And the important thing to remember is that, you know, there's no reward for unrequited love. At the end of the day, you don't get a medal. You know, what you may have done is wasted an awful lot of time dreaming, hoping, and suffering from a love that can never be. And you really do have to look at this with Neptune in the seventh. Is the person you are trying to find, who doesn't exist, but you've got some kind of notion of what it would be like, or who that person is, so that you're kind of blinded to the reality of people, because the image of what you want is blinding you to any kind of reality. You want something that's beyond reality. But also this idea of having a broken heart, or having someone leave you, or someone you love suffering. There comes a point where you have to really come to that realization. Is this wasting your life? You know, it's just a question. I'm not saying you are. Only you can answer that. But there is this thing about unrequited love that happens with the seventh house, but not all the time. You may be listening to me right now. You've got Neptune going through the seventh house. You're very happy. You're a solid twosome. But remember, of course, relationships are much more than just your significant other and you. It can be relationships at work, relationships with the family, relationships with bosses, you know, so they're all vulnerable to Neptunian kind of, you know, mirages and issues that you can't quite put your finger on or prove to be time wasting. So as much as we want Neptune to bring us the true love we've been waiting for, which it can in the seventh house, we have to be aware of all these other things that are getting in the way. On the way to the wedding, what are the ghosts, the patterns in your unconscious mind? What is getting in the way of true union? Neptune is teaching you that. Eighth house, it still has relationship overtones, but this is more to do with, you know, money and assets. And it's often, I think, with Neptune in the eighth house, and it depends how old you are and what time of life, what period of life you're going through. Because if you're, let's say, in your 20s and you've got Neptune going through your eighth house, it might be the kind of period where you sort of say to yourself, you know, I want to be with someone for my life who can support me. I want somebody who, you know, meets up with my imaginings of what a relationship is all about. But it, you know, I need to get something from this relationship. It's very important that I get something. And then, of course, because it's Neptune going through your eighth house, you find that the person who you have attached yourself to isn't real. Well, I mean, yeah, flesh and blood, but the things you thought about that person, what that person had to offer you, that you were looking forward to sharing, to receiving from this person, it's not going to happen. Doesn't happen. So if the seventh house is about unrequited love, the eighth house is about disappointment in what you get from a relationship. What you thought you'd get isn't what you get. And I'm not going to say there's necessarily an answer to this, because it's also analyzing your expectations and why you thought that and why then you get the disappointment. But it's also another area where you can be misled and deliberately misled. And you have to be just as careful, not only about one-on-one relationships, but also your relationships with banks and lending institutions and credit card companies. Are you putting your money into a bona fide company, or will they let you down? It's also strange that money coming to you, and whether that's by inheritance or by settlement, weird things happen. You don't get what you expected. Whether you get something wonderful, you didn't really expect that, didn't expect to inherit that, but more likely it's the other way around. So there are all sorts of things you didn't know about the money coming to you that isn't what you thought it would be. It actually reveals something about the person who's left you that legacy. Or there are all sorts of other things coming into the receipt of that you didn't expect or you didn't know about. And settlements can be very, very dodgy. But let's get the best thing out of Neptune in the eighth house, and you could win the lottery. Neptune going through your eighth house, you received a huge amount of money in absolutely extraordinary circumstances. So you can expect a lot, but really and truly, you need to let Neptune teach you what you need to know as far as your relationship with other people and what you get from your relationship with other people. Ninth house, well, you know, Neptune's quite a happy camper in the ninth house. And those of you already interested in astrology and mysticism and the cosmos and all of that are going to really have a wonderful time with Neptune in the ninth house. You're going to go on great journeys into understanding and enlightenment. That's really the best of Neptune. But you may also find that you do travel quite a lot with Neptune in the ninth house to places, unusual places. These are not your, journeys to the Spanish seaside for, a sun-drenched holiday. These are journeys to inner Mexico, where the Aztecs were, or going to the North Pole and experiencing all sorts of things that you didn't know about how you lived there. So your experience is taking you into rarefied kind of zones. But also, we have to remember that sometimes Neptune is very, very deceptive, and that you can get caught up in cults that are not what they seem. And how often do we come across cults where in the beginning it always seems as though this is the right path for you, this is where you were meant to be, but it turns out there's something not altogether okay about that, and before you know where you are, what you thought it was is not what it was, and you've got caught up in something. So when you've got Neptune moving through your ninth house, be very, very careful about cults. Also, if you work in academia or you work in legal situations, the ninth house is about law and justice and academia. While again, you get the idea that there are some dreamy situations you may find yourself in, a dream job, a dream situation, you can also lose that situation through very mysterious circumstances. The other thing that I think is super important about the ninth house is it's about where we want to be further down the line. So depending on your age again, I mean, if you're 20, you might have decades and you may never even think about where do I want to be when I'm 60. But when you get to, late 40s, 50s, you do start to think about how you want to spend the latter part of your life. And that's very important with Neptune, because what you have to do is really look at the dream of where you want to be and the reality. And your imaginings and the trajectory you set yourself for where you want to be further down the line really has to be based on fact. You have to put substance, you have to put bricks and mortar on your plans for the future. Okay, keep it real. 10th house, again, I've looked at this with the midheaven, Neptune on the midheaven, which can bring you your dreams again. There is a theme always with Neptune about dreams, the realization of dreams, the broken dreams. They're the two opposites that you get here. But as Neptune moves through the 10th house, don't be surprised if you lose a kind of sense of purpose. You kind of lose the enthusiasm or the focus that you had. You become disillusioned with the job that you have or the aspirations to lead the life that you're leading. You become like, is this really what it's all about? Am I doing the right thing? Did I really want this? Is this what I want? So there can be a sense of directionlessness so that you feel unanchored. And that's a very difficult thing. What you have to say to yourself is that obviously this is only happening when Neptune is either on the MC or when it's connecting with planets and points from that 10th house position, that you're going to feel, is this pointless? And what I'm doing isn't fulfilling. It's pointless. I'm not happy, but I don't know what to do. I don't know what I should be doing. Where should I be going? So there are all these endless questions with Neptune in this area, when it connects with other planets and points. Sometimes it's really a case of just waiting the couple of years that Neptune's on that planet or point, waiting till it's passed, because it's a bit like being on a raft in the open sea. You're not in charge of it. The current is going to take you where you need to go. You have to be prepared for the journey, You have to relax, trust the cosmos, just wait and see which shoreline you end up on. That doesn't mean you abdicate responsibility. You don't think about things that you might like to do or that could make for better conditions in the job and the life that you have. It doesn't mean you just abdicate responsibility, but it does mean your attitude is, this is going to take a couple of years for me to really find my place in the world. It's going to take me a couple of years. And you know what? I'm going to be patient and trusting, and I'm not going to panic, and I'm not going to go chasing rainbows and doing mad things. I'm going to go through this journey with open eyes and with no expectations, except that the journey itself is important. Neptune in the 11th house. Now, we often understand more about the 11th house because of the 5th house. And if the fifth house is about you and your offerings and your creativity, in the 11th house, it's really about the collective. So you're part of a collective. And the understanding that whatever you do, and we all have a personal story, we all have some kind of personal ambitions and personal needs. Of course we do. But when we've got Neptune transiting the 11th house, we become a little bit more preoccupied with humanity as a whole. And we start thinking about recycling or what we're doing to the planet instead of just willy-nilly doing what pleases us or what feels right to us. We start to ask ourselves, our part in the bigger story, we need to be more aware of that. So it's a very Aquarian kind of territory. It's about humanity. But the 11th house follows on from the 10th house. So in as much as in the 10th house, when Neptune was moving through there, you came across all these issues with who do I want to be? Where do I want to go? What is my place in the world? By the time it comes to the 11th house, it is really about the fulfillment that you're getting from the decisions you made and the situations that came up when you were in the 10th house. So there is a more altruistic, more idealistic feel to life. And it may also be important for you to find your tribe. You hear people sort of saying that, don't you? Oh, I found my tribe. But just what a sense of coming home that is, a sense of being accepted, a sense of being part of a group of which you are an innate part, resonating on the same kind of note or whatever, however that whatever picture that creates in your own mind. And again, it's the sense of the group as opposed to the personal. So on one hand, you get this idea of ideals being front forward, but also illusions. And in as much as I talked about the 9th house being a place where you can get involved in cults and they can turn out to be very dangerous, you can get the same thing happening with Neptune in the 11th house. You can get associated with groups that you go into it initially thinking, I found my tribe and I found a whole group of people and they're going to, and my part in this story is really my highest hopes and ideals. And what you find instead is that it's not. People aren't who they said they were. The purposes of the group or whatever it was are not true, not real. And you may end up having sacrificed some friends, some aspects of your existence, believing that this group, this collaboration, this cult, this whatever it is worth giving up and sacrificing a lot for. And so there is that acknowledgement. No, it's not. But then that's part of your story. I'm not saying that everybody with an 11th house Neptune transit is going to have this identikit experience, but something like that is the essence of Neptune in the 11th house, transiting the 11th house. Last but not least, we come to Neptune moving through the 12th house. Now, of course, this is Neptune's home ground. Neptune rules the 12th house. It is the area of the unconscious mind. It has a lot to do with higher realms, whether we're thinking about the higher mind or whether we're thinking about the existence of higher realms realms and faith and all of that kind of spiritual experience that we crave deep down in our souls, that is located in the 12th house. But the 12th house is where we escape to as well. And as I talked about, in the first part of this video, I talked about, we get caught up in things and we can escape, whether it's quite literally, we choose to retreat from life, or we choose to join a very private kind of community, something like that. But we can also escape by drugs and by, all sorts of other addictions. And that needs to be avoided at all costs. But it's there in the 12th house. That's 12th house experience. And we need to be aware of it and not get sucked in to those routes through which Neptune makes itself available. We have to always remember the higher space that Neptune is calling us to. And I think, again, we need to think about what age in life we are when Neptune transits our 12th house. Now, if we're in our 70s and 80s, well, Neptune moving through our 12th house is the time that the veil between real life and the life beyond becomes much thinner, whether we are preparing to leave our physical bodies and move into whatever state we think comes after that. But I mean, if this is happening when you're 40 or 30 or 20, then that's really not applicable. And it is much more likely that a desire to inhabit spiritual realms, whether you do that through yoga and meditation and your spiritual journey, that's what you're supposed to be doing. But it isn't that thin veil between life and death. We have to be versatile with our astrology, and the age we are makes a difference to how that transit will work out. For instance, Neptune in the 3rd house, which is your mentality, your thinking processes. If you're 90 years old and Neptune is going through your 3rd house, you might get a little bit fuzzy in your thinking, okay? It's not going to happen when you're 20, but it could happen later on in life. So these things, aren't something that is just a blanket approach. Your age, your experience, your proclivity towards things, your history, your life itself is going to play into this. But Neptune moving through your 12th house can be a very enriching experience. If it isn't, a vehicle by which you start hunting around for drugs and other escapist material, then it can be extremely elevating, and spiritual experiences, the richness of your unconscious mind, revealing its riches in helping you negotiate your life with a more enlightened kind of vision, because you have accessed your unconscious mind, the higher realms. You have also managed to enrich your psychic life by Neptune's transit through the 12th house. That's very available to you. But remember, it's not one long note for one 13-year span. It's only going to reach you, be present, fulfill what I'm telling you when it connects with something in your natal chart. So I have gone through Neptune in the houses, and I think it gives you a good idea. And as I say in my work when I teach, while the signs are very important, you can almost think of the signs as the kind of costume that something will wear. It's putting on a costume. If you want to use a cooking analogy, then it's marinating something in a different flavor. That's what the signs are like. But the real meat and potatoes of things are really the house and the angles, in this case, Neptune is going to make. So, in conclusion, Neptune is really a journey. Of all the planets, this is going to take you outside yourself. Neptune is going to take you into the beyond, whatever the beyond may represent to you, but only, as I say, when it makes connections with something in your natal chart. Neptune is the master of illusion and delusion. We know that. So we also have to be very careful whenever Neptune is in transit in our charts, or just now looking out on the world and seeing what it may be doing, that we have to continually check what is real, what is false. We do this with every bit of strange news or reports we get. Check it out. Is that real? Is it truth? That's the best we do, because Neptune can enlighten and reveal things that we never thought possible, but at the same time, it can be very deceptive. And we can go down rabbit holes that, we really shouldn't go down. Neptune is enlightenment. Neptune is accessing our higher selves, the higher mind, higher consciousness. But it can also take us into some very, very dark places indeed. And I think with all the signs, whatever sign Neptune is going through, we're going to go to a dark place, which we can then attribute is Aries in nature, or Martian Mars in nature. But I think we also have to remember with Neptune, and when we tune into it and we think about what Neptune represents in life and to us, we must always aspire to its highest nature. But then when we succumb to its lower nature, and all of us do that, we all get caught up in things that aren't good for us and we shouldn't do that, habits, addictions, doing things that undermine other people. It's human nature. What we have to do, and this is Neptunian, of course, is find forgiveness. We do one thing and must remind ourselves about continually with Neptune, is that if we can find forgiveness, not only for other people, but for ourselves, that's also a way of working with Neptune and manifesting the very best that Neptune can offer. So I hope you've enjoyed this journey with me. As I said, there is more to come as we go through the year. The Saturn-Neptune conjunction, the Jupiter-Neptune square. I'm going to be talking about all these things. So take care. Bless you all. Bye for now.